Welcome to our first Q&A. Before we get started with all the questions, I'd just like to run through the Enterprise Academy etiquette. So hopefully today's session's going to be full of lots of useful information all about leadership as Lee shares his insights. So where possible, it's really important that you're in a space where you can listen and you can concentrate and make any notes if you need to. I know a lot of you have got your mics and your videos turned off, which is great. And if you could keep that sort of maintained throughout the session just to avoid any technical difficulties or delays, that would be fantastic. This next one goes without saying because I know how fantastic you are, but it's really important that we recognise that our guests have given up their own time to come and speak to us today. So it's really important that we respect them, but also respect each other. There might be time for a couple of questions at the end, and if there is, you'll be invited to pop your questions in the chat box, and then they can be proposed to Lee. So without further ado, I'll get started. So welcome, Lee. First of all, how are you?
I'm very well, thank you.
Good. We feel really privileged to have you here. And I know there are lots of sort of diehard Sheffield Wednesday fans who will know all about your career, but I also know that there might be a couple of students who will be here that might not know as much. So what I think would be fantastic is if you could just start off by sharing with us briefly your career journey so far, starting from your playing days in Scotland.
Okay, so I was born and brought up just outside Edinburgh in a place called Pennycook. From a playing point of view, 15 years old, I signed schoolboy forms with a club called Dunfermline. At 18, I got released. At 19, I signed non-league football forms up in Scotland and did well enough to get signed by a team called Meadowbank Thistle, who are now taken over, like Wimbledon got taken over by MK Dons. Meadowbank got taken over by a club called Livingston. Lasted 2 years there. Got released. Signed for Stenhousemuir in Scotland. 2 years later, got released. And decided to go off on travels. I went to play football in Australia. I knew somebody over there. And I went travelling for 8 years. I played a year's football in Australia. I played 5 years in Hong Kong. I played 2 years in Greece. Came back to Scotland and signed for Dunfermline again. So basically went around the planet back again and ended up signing for the club that released me when I was 18. From Dunfermline, played 3-4 years there. Signed for Sheffield Wednesday when I was 33 years old. Stayed for another 4 years. Finished my footballing career at a club back in Scotland called Falkirk at 38 years old, and then stepped on the coaching bandwagon. And had a couple of years in Scotland with Falkirk, with the academy, then the first team. Come back down to Sheffield Wednesday, worked with the academy, and I've been here too many years to count, to be honest with you. Worked with first team, done the manager's job 3 times in between managers getting sacked or moving on. Took over temporarily 3 times, and now back working with the under-23s.
Oh, wow. Well, thank you for sharing that with us. And it sounds like you're certainly well travelled, and obviously you've worn lots of different hats in the coaching sort of sector. But going back to you as a player then, obviously sometimes there is this debate about whether leadership is innate and we're kind of born leaders, or whether leadership is a sort of a skill that can be developed and taught. And I'm just wondering whether you feel like you always had leadership tendencies, or whether you think that this was something that kind of developed as you got older.
From my own personal experiences, I think leadership comes from experience, to be honest with you. Growing up in school, even at primary school, there's always the loud kids and the quiet kids, and the louder ones always come across as the leaders, and the more quiet kids sort of follow them around and everything like that. But that doesn't necessarily mean they're a good leader. I think as time went on in my career, from a footballing point of view, I certainly grew in confidence. I certainly grew as a player myself, and I think it comes first and foremost from your own peers, to be honest with you. When you earn that respect to your teammates, your own coaches and managers that work with you, you slowly grow in confidence, and your voice becomes louder. People start listening to you. So, as I say, from my own personal experience, I don't think you're necessarily born with it. I think it comes with experience, and a little bit of success, to be honest with you.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, that was really useful to hear. So moving on then, as you were a captain, and when I was kind of doing a little bit of research, something that I saw was that you were voted as like one of Sheffield Wednesday's greatest captains. And I just wondered what you kind of think made you such a good captain.
I signed for Sheffield Wednesday when I was 33 years old, as I've said just a few seconds ago. At that time, there was three of us. There was one other lad that was a little bit older than me. When I signed, there was a lad called Chris Marsden who was the captain. He was older than me. The manager at the time was Chris Turner, so he obviously went for experience as his captain. Mm-hmm. Unfortunately, Chris took a really bad injury with his hamstring, so he had to retire from the game. And at the time, the manager decided to put me temporarily in the captaincy role. Now, again, whether you're born a captain or not, I don't know, but I think I earned the right. The other players tended to look up to me. I certainly wasn't the best player in the team by any means. There was a lot of lads that were a lot more technically gifted than I was. But I think what earned me the right was, one, experience, but two, I think my attitude towards the game. I had a lot of ups and downs. When I introduced myself, I specifically mentioned the fact that I'd been released 3 or 4 times during my career. And I think in any sort of leadership role or management role or anything like that, it's not until you've had knockbacks or until you've fallen down that you realise you get up and get on with things and keep going, that they're just learning opportunities, really. Mm-hmm. And I think slowly but surely, as I say, in my career, I learned from the times that I got released or got disappointments. Mm-hmm. And I think that meant that I appreciated exactly the opportunities I was given. So from an experience point of view, from an attitude point of view, I had certainly learned from past experiences. And with that comes a lot more confidence in communication. Mm-hmm. I think as a leader, you've got to communicate clearly and help. And I think leadership in general is very much a big contradiction. A lot of the time, good leaders need good communication. Mm-hmm. But I think the best leaders sometimes just sit and listen. Listening is such an important thing too. You've got to listen to your staff, got to listen to your teammates, got to listen to your workmates, got to listen to the people above you, got to listen to people that maybe are below you in the rungs of the ladder. Mm-hmm. So there's times you have to give somebody a kick up the backside, and there's times you have to put your arm around somebody and wrap them up in cotton wool. So leadership can be done any type of way, but ultimately it's about knowing the staff you work with, whether mm-hmm. that's managing up the way to directors or to chairman, or managing down the way to working with everybody within the football club, whether they're a cleaner, a laundry lady, a kit man, or fellow teammates. So, yeah, from a captaincy point of view, I think it was just down to the communication and the experience side of things.
Okay, so like the experience, the communication, also you mentioned like attitude as well was quite important, and
yeah,
positive and resilient as well in the face of setbacks. Coming to your role now then as a senior professional development coach, what would you say your leadership style is? If you have one?
I give it a bit of both. I'm quite brash, I'm quite a strong person, so if my young lads step out of line, they'll be told. They've got to understand at the moment, basically the group of boys that I work with are one step away from first team football. So we have to be honest with them. We have to be clear cut. As you're coming up through an academy when you're 9, 10, 11, 12 years old, it's all about fun. It's all about the development side of things. It's not so much about winning games of football. It's about learning the game in the proper manner. As you get older at under 18 up to under 23, my group now are one step away from first team football. And again, I'm talking from a football point of view, but a lot of things link to any walk of life, to be honest with you. And when you're one step away from that next level, the pressures become a lot higher. So I try to treat my under 23 team like a first team. I try to drill into them the importance of doing things right. Even things like turning up on time for your work, like tidying up the changing room after you've left. It's just simple things like that. It's so important. Mm-hmm. Even sometimes I saw a great video on YouTube once, and it was a US Navy leader talking to students, and all great leaders start with make your own bed in the morning type of thing. It was a great speech. I don't know if you could look it up on YouTube, but it's the simple things that set your standards as a human being to get you going. And I try and drill that into the under 23 lads, because if they are lucky enough to get called up by the first team manager up to the first team, the standards that they'll be set will be second to none. So I try and prepare them ready for that. And if it means giving them a kick up the backside at the right time, I'll do that. But I'll also look after them and understand that they are young men making their way in the game. Majority of them will not get an opportunity at first team football, unfortunately, but that's the nature of the beast. But my previous role, when I was assistant coach there, I always saw myself as a link between the players and the manager. On occasions, between myself as assistant coach and the first team manager, sometimes you have to play that good cop, bad cop role and trying to get a reaction out of players. So you have to wear various hats. And as I say, a lot of this is transferable, not just from a football training ground aspect. It can go into corporate business, whether you're in banking or whether you work on a building site with groups of lads or girls. It can work either way.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's kind of a really important point that you make, that leadership is very much a skill which is kind of transferable. But coming back to your kind of leadership style, has that style been influenced by anyone? And if so, why?
I think what I've always said growing up as a player, if I ever got the opportunity to be a manager myself or a coach or something like that, I looked at all the coaches I've worked with, and I probably took more from... I looked at what they did, and it was more about, I really like it. Not necessarily about, I really like that, I'll do that when I'm a coach. It's more about other things where I thought, I don't really like the way he's done that, I would do it differently. So I've taken more from the things I didn't like about certain coaches than the things they did do well. I came into the game a little bit later. I never came up right all the way through the system. I had to take a step back. When I was released by Dunfermline at 18 and joined Meadowbank Thistle, that was only part-time football. So I actually worked for the Alliance and Leicester Building Society for 4 or 5 years while I was playing part-time football in Scotland. So when I did get the opportunity of full-time professional football, I really did respect the opportunity I'd been given, and I didn't want to give it up. So maybe that's why I worked a little bit harder. It was something that I started to study early on when I got the opportunity of full-time football, because a lot of people, when they get the first opportunity of professional football, they're maybe 17, 18, 19 years old. I was 21, 22 years old, so I was behind the curve from that point of view. But I've always appreciated it a little bit more than some of the lads that have not had to work for a living, so to speak. So, yeah, it's more about the things that I didn't like what they coached. I took on board, and I thought, right, if I get the opportunity, I will do it differently. So that's the way I looked at it. So
you kind of moulded it in terms of
absolutely
what you didn't like from previous managers.
Of course.
Okay. And with regards to being like a coach or a leader, alongside the successes, there's obviously the challenges as well. So what do you think is perhaps the biggest or toughest challenge that you face?
I'm going to say in modern day football at the moment, the biggest danger to any coach or any individual player at the moment is social media. It really is, because it's opened up avenues for supporters to be very negative towards people when they're maybe having a bad game, going through a hard time, when managers are losing games, coaches are losing games. And obviously nowadays, a lot of chairmen, a lot of other supporters, a lot of fans from other teams, they read websites, they read social media platforms, and it can be a really tough thing for people to deal with. And I think a big aspect of life over the last sort of 5 to 10 years that's really exploded is mental awareness, mental health of certain individuals. Now people will look, and rightly so, will put professional footballers on a pedestal, but ultimately they're still human beings. And when things are not going well, that's when really we need more from the supporters to support the players. But what you will find more often than not is that the minority, and it is a minority, the majority are positive and supportive in it, but the minority are the ones that shout loudest on social media and can be very, very negative, and it can really affect. I've seen some players really, really affected negatively with their with 1 or 2 bad performances, and that just snowballs. Really does snowball, because they're continually on social media looking at negative comments towards themselves. Some the players come off social media, but their girlfriends, their wives, their children still read it, and they're looking at that thinking, that's my dad you're talking about, that's my husband you're talking about, that's my boyfriend you're talking about. And it can really affect people's mental state, to be honest with you. So it's really tough arena out there at the moment because of that sort of, and people are able to hide behind their anonymity and become keyboard warriors. So it's quite tough from that point of view. So that is without doubt the number one danger to any sort of in-sporting environment. Is a tough place.
So like social media and the negative comments, but do you think the pressure is of the football environment that's perhaps a challenge as well? Or
there's always pressures, and I think more and more nowadays, ultimately one team can only win the league. So that means currently in the championship, I think it's 24 teams or 26 teams. That means 25 teams are not going to win the league. So it's trying to balance the reality, and ultimately at any football club, they will all have their realistic aims and targets. And as a coach, you can only control the controllables, as I say. You can only put a team out there. You can't control whether or not you're going to have 5 or 6 injuries one day. You can't control whether one of your players are going to make a rash challenge and get sent off in a game. So you're going to have to adapt to that. You can only control what you can control. You can't decide as a coach what the ticket prices are at your football club, which maybe upsets some supporters or something like that. You can't decide who the sponsor is going to be or who the kit manufacturer is going to be at your football club. You concentrate on your players, your training and everything like that. So with that comes pressures, absolutely. And in modern day football, it's all about winning. And sometimes you just have to go out there, get the result the best you possibly can, but also handle the negatives when they come.
Oh, well, thank you for sharing that with us. And so you spoke about and touched on already that leadership is kind of transferable. But just coming to your previous role of being a director of estate agents, do you think your leadership style was the same for kind of both of those, or?
So the background to that is my coaching journey started up in Scotland at Falkirk, and started as academy coach, then a first team coach, and financial reasons meant the club had to cut budgets and everything like that. Financial reasons meant I come back down to Sheffield, and when I first joined Sheffield Wednesday, I joined in a part-time role, very part-time role. But when we come back down, my current partner, her family owned an estate agent, and her mum and dad were retiring, so we decided to invest in that, buy the business, and take it over as joint directors. So I was doing a part-time role at Wednesday, and we owned the business. Slowly but surely, as my role increased at Sheffield Wednesday, became full-time and took over first team and everything like that, my time at the company became more diluted, so I had to step away from that, so signed the full company over to my good lady. But during my time there, yes, a lot of the stuff's transferable, but it was also quite different in the fact that as a football coach, the players are my staff, but I don't make the final decision on it as an assistant coach on whether or not you still have a job at the end of the season. That's normally the head coach or the manager or the chairman's role. At the estate agents, we had a small team of 10 to 15 people who they were reliant on you of running the business properly to ensure that they still had a job at the time. And with the property business, it goes up and down. It's quite it fluctuates throughout the year. There's always challenges. There's always changes in legislation from government. There's always new businesses starting up that become rivals of yours. It's a dog-eat-dog world out there, whether you're an estate agent, whether you're in the football world, as I say, when you're a building company or whatever. So you just have to adapt and build. And adaptability is a very, very important trait to have from any sort of leadership, whether you're an owner of a company or whether you're a leadership of a group, a building site, or you're working as a bin man. You're always a group. You're always a little team. So, but adaptability is so important. And I learned a lot in that time, and dealing with things like payroll, dealing with things like budgets, dealing with things like accounts at the end of a financial year and everything like that. It was all great experience for me. So from a business point of view, it's so important. Different from football. because you had people reliant on you for their jobs, and it was up to us to continue finding ways to make profits to ensure people had jobs. And as I say, I stepped away before the pandemic started, so it's been a lot tougher for a lot of businesses, and trying to keep your head above water financially has been really tough.
Mm-hmm. So it sounds like, from what you've said there, although the environments are different, some of the skills like adaptability, which you've mentioned, are still very much transferable to
100%.
whatever role or sector you would like to work in. So with that then, what advice would you give to students? Because we have students on here who are from sports courses, from foundation coaching degrees, and we also have some business students and students from all kind of courses. But what advice would you give to those students who are aspiring leaders?
The only two real things that I think are most important is, one is about getting experience as soon as you possibly can in whatever line of work you want to go in. Now, that's easier said than done. People look for opportunities, but experience is key in anything, and getting that first step in the ladder is important. And that's, I think, building experience. And now, listen, if you end up wanting to be an accountant or a business leader or something like that, by the way, experience working in a coffee shop is just as important, because you're working with the public, you're understanding finances that are going around, you're understanding stock take, you're all these type of things. So from experience, it doesn't mean that I want to be the best accountant in the world, doesn't mean that I can only work in an accountancy company in any way whatsoever. Experience is just getting out there in the real world and working with people, and as I say, communication's key, and working from that side of things. The other side of it, I would say, is mistakes are so important. Mistakes are important in any walk of life, because every single mistake is a learning opportunity. It's a way of seeing where you went wrong. Why did I make that mistake? How did that go wrong? What did I do the next time to make it right? So you don't go out primarily to make mistakes in any way, and you don't plan to make mistakes. But mistakes are so key in anything you do, whether that you're a coach of an under-12 football team, whether you're a head of an estate agent, whether you work in a coffee shop, whether you're a bar manager, a restaurant manager, whatever. Making mistakes and understanding of where you learn from is so important. So from my point of view is, don't see mistakes as a negative, see it as a positive, see it as a learning opportunity, see it as a way of understanding where you went wrong and how you adapt and how you go forward.
Oh, lovely. I'm glad you said that, because as sort of part of the careers and employability team, we try and push so much for students to get work experience and part-time jobs. And even like you've said, even though it might not be in the sector you want to work in, it's still really important. And those skills, like we've talked about today, are kind of transferable to whatever sector you want to go into. But yeah, also kind of reflecting on your mistakes to identify where you went wrong and perhaps learn from them so that you don't make those.
Exactly.
Exactly. Thank you for that. And we've got two quick short questions for the last one. So many successful leaders have habits. So for example, people get up at like 4 a.m. or, meditate, whatever. I just wondered if you have any kind of habits that make you a successful leader.
No, not necessarily, not from the coaching side of things. When I was a player, a lot of players have superstitions. Mm-hmm. A lot of players have superstitions. They have to put their shin pads on before they put their t-shirt on, or they walk out on a pitch and then put their t-shirt on. A lot of players like to, depending on what religion they are, they like to touch the grass as soon as they walk on the pitch and bless themselves. A lot of players like to be the last one out on the pitch. Mm-hmm. A lot of players, well, if they win 1 week, they will do the exact same. They'll remember exactly what they've done and try and do that the next week. Now, if they lose, they look for a different trait. Yeah. Now, when I was a player, I always liked to be last out on the pitch. But then I was given the armband, and you have to lead the team out, so I had to get rid of that. So, again, it's more about superstitions. Personally, now as a coach, I don't have any of these sort of things. I'm certainly not up at 4 o'clock in the morning. I've got 2 6-year-old twins that get me up at 6, and that's early enough. So I'm definitely not getting up at 4.
No earlier than that. Okay,
no chance.
Sharing that with us.
Some of you students will just be going to bed at 4 o'clock, never mind getting up at 4.
And finally, Lee, then, what's your mantra or a saying that you live by, if you have one?
I've got a couple of, well, one's my own one, but the other one is a nice little saying that I've got. Some of them can come across as corny, but you go by it. I've always led by myself is always do what's right, not what is easy. That's what I always think, because sometimes you have to bump heads because it's the right for the business, it's right for your job, it's right for your company. Now, it's not necessarily the easy thing, it's not the nicest thing, but you have to do what's right. So yeah, do what's right, not what's easy. And the other one, which is a great quote from Muhammad Ali, which is, I suppose it's one that I really had affinity with after. When I heard it, I looked back at my own career and thought about those 2 or 3 times as a kid when I was released at 18-year-old, and then I got released at 19, and then again at 20-year-old, is you don't fail when you get knocked down. Mm-hmm. You only fail if you stay down. So it's one of them. Keep getting up, keep going forward. Ultimately, you can only fail when you stop trying. So no matter what you want to be, if you want to be a brain surgeon, until you stop trying to be a brain surgeon, you can't fail. So I saw that from a professional football point of view, that I'm going to keep going, I'm going to keep going, I'm going to keep going, and until the point where I stop, then I feel as if I've failed. So that was my own personal sort of take on things.
Oh, that's lovely. Thank you for sharing that with us. So coming to some questions then, we've had a handful in the chat. So the first one was, who was your most difficult teammate? You don't have to mention any names, but how did you manage the relationship there?
When I was still playing, I was captain at the time, and the manager at the time brought in a lad that he had worked with in the past and decided to make him captain. So that disappointed me in the first place, and I ultimately built up a touch of resentment initially with this lad that first came in. We never really seen eye to eye. With a way of dealing with that, you have to be professional now. And again, I'm going to say from a footballing point of view, but this will relate to any office environment, as I say, if you work in a restaurant, a bar, you're not going to get on with everybody you work with. But from a professional point of view, and I always made sure that while I was at the training ground, I was 100% for the team, rather than have conflicts with individuals. You don't necessarily have to like anybody that you work with, or like somebody that you work with, but as long as you get on and do the right things for the team, that's the most important thing. So I never saw eye to eye with this lad, and he came in, he was sort of, for me, his character wasn't right, and I felt that he came across as if he was better. Now, maybe that was a confidence because he knew the relationship he had with the manager. But I never let that affect me from a team aspect point of view. And that, for me, I could have easily let that affect me, and I think that would have affected the dynamic from my teammates, that they had sort of held me in a positive way. But if I had let that thing affect me, I think it would have been a negative from the other teammates to me. They would have looked at me and said, hang on a minute, that's not the Lee Bullen I know side of things. So I never let it affect me there. But yeah, there's certain, I'm not going to name names because that'd be unfair. But there was a lad that we never really got on with because I felt he was more selfish than team orientated, where I always saw that the team was more important than the individual.
Okay, so it was about focusing on that professionalism and then not letting it bother you at all.
Yeah.
Thank you for that. So the next one then, so you've obviously been up and down the leadership ladder from being a leader on the pitch to manager to coach. How have you dealt with changing responsibilities and not always moving upwards or sideways?
Again, it's about adaptability. I think I love the job I've got. I mean, ultimately, you would love to be given the opportunity full time as the first team manager wherever you work. But I also know, and I think there was pretty clear communication from the chairman the 2 or 3 times I was given the opportunity to step in, that he was going to be bringing somebody else in. So I was never led under any false illusions that I was definitely going to get the job. The last time I did it, I thought there was half an opportunity because he never came out straight away and said it. He says, you've got an opportunity. We're looking around, but you've got an opportunity. But prior to that, I was always said, look, we're speaking to somebody. There's going to be somebody coming in for 2 or 3 weeks, but take the team for the next 2 or 3 weeks, and then we'll sort it out. So I think ultimately it comes down to clear communication from the people above you. It doesn't lead you into any false sense of security. I think it's just a case of handling that. That's up to you, the way you want to deal with it. You can take that as a slight, you can take that as a negative, or you can enjoy the role you've got. And I really enjoy where I work. I really enjoy the football club I work with. I feel as if I'm privileged in the role I've got, and I feel as if I've still got a job to do at whatever level to help the players that I work with, whether they're under 23 players or first team players.
Oh, well, thank you for sharing that with us. We really appreciate the time that you've given to us today to come and speak to us. And I really appreciate how honest you've been with your answers, because I certainly feel like I've got a lot out of the session. So I can imagine that the students have found it inspiring, and they have also got a lot out of it too. We haven't got time for any more questions, unfortunately. But before we go, Natalie is just going to pop the feedback form to this session in the chat. The Enterprise Academy are really keen to hear your feedback and how useful you found these sessions. So if you have 30 seconds, we would really appreciate it if you could take the time to fill that in, and then we'll feed that back to you, Lee. And it's also just a little plug for December's activities as well. So next month in December, the theme is going to be creativity and innovation. And we have a Thinking Outside the Box masterclass on 3rd of December. And we also have David Angrave from Twinkle coming in to deliver an inspirational insight Q&A as well, and that's on the 10th of December, and both of the links are in the chat. But once again, Lee, thank you so much for coming to speak to us today. It's been a real benefit to the academy, and I'm sure students would have got a lot out of it.
Really appreciate it. If I didn't get around to other people's questions, I apologise, but I really enjoyed it, and good luck with whatever way you decide to go with your careers.
No, thank you, and we wish you all the best of luck for the season.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thanks, Lee. Much appreciated, mate. You're a star. Thank you.
Cheers, Steve.
Thank
you.
All the best,
Bye.
mate. Take care.
Bye.
Cheers.
Take care.
Bye-bye.
Bye. Thank you, everyone.
Bye-bye.
Was that it?
That is everything, Adam. The session is finished now, so you're free to go.
Right.
Thanks for coming. See you soon.
See ya.